So again, another what we think is a good and great exploration project and development story in Europe, Galantas Gold. It's a fairly old story in some ways, but very new in many ways, because a lot of people just don't know who Galantas Gold is, and I'll explain to you why we think we have one of the best exploration and development stories in Europe. Everyone knows the typical forward-looking statements. So what is Galantas Gold? We're fully permitted. We're 20 kilometers away from Dalridian. For those of you that don't know Dalridian, it's a world-class asset. It was bought in 2018 by Orion, 6 million ounces of gold at around 13 grams. It could be 10 million ounces today, but definitely a world-class asset. They're finally getting through their permitting process. They hit a major milestone where it's now finally scheduled, and our internal team and everyone we talk to thinks sometime early next year will be the final granting of their permit, which is quite exciting. For Galantas, we're fully permitted. We've been permitted. We've operated an open pit mine, 30,000 ounces, and then it was transitioning to underground mine. And then some hiccups around COVID and Brexit that really caused a lot of delays at Galantas. But we think we have a multi-million ounce deposit, and I'll show you why. We're on the exact same belt as Dalridian Gold. We're on the same structure as Newfound Gold, just greatly underexplored asset relative to a lot of the others. So where are we? We're in Northern Ireland. And for those of you that don't know, Ireland, Greenland, Newfoundland, UK, Scotland, we're all one very large landmass. And over the millions of years, as they separated, you create these major faults, which allowed the fluids to come up, and you get these high-grade deposits like you see in Newfoundland, what you see at Dalridian, and other parts of Europe. And we'll show you why we're on the exact same belt, just underexplored, but really real potential for a multi-million ounce deposit. So what's different with us relative to a lot of the other juniors? We operated as an open pit. There's 2.5 kilometers of underground development at Galantas. The vision of the former CEO at the time was really to focus on Galantas as a old-time mining concept, which is start small, generate the cash flow, build your resources, expand as your resources expand, but use internal cash flow to get there. At the same time, Dalridian, using the Canadian style, which is drill, 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 and they create a lot of value for their shareholders. But Galantas, the story is still quite important because the infrastructure is now all there, but the exploration upside is there as well. So really our strategy going forward now is get it back into development. We need about 10 million range US to get it back into development. And from there, we believe it'll be about cash flow positive. And then we can start reinvesting our cash flow back into the exploration side. And I'll show you why we think not only can we get some good production out of here, starting around 1,400 ounces a month, grow to about 20 to 25,000 ounces a month. And then from there, expand it to 30 to 35, then to 50,000 ounces a year. One of the key differences now that COVID is over, when we were trying to get this back into production, we had a major hiccup. We were struggling to find an experienced workforce in Northern Ireland. With Brexit, you weren't able to hire employees without an Irish or British passport. COVID was around. It was just hard to find employees. We tried it. We recognized we couldn't get the experienced employees, so we shut things down, waiting for an experienced workforce to come in. Today, about 6 months ago, Terra Mines, which is an asset in Ireland, zinc mine owned by Ballina, has been shut down. They'll likely be on care and maintenance for an extraordinary long time, we believe. So now all of a sudden, there's a very experienced workforce in Ireland that can come to Galantas through our mining contractor, QME, which does contract mining. Obviously was doing it for Terra Mines at the time, but also does contract mining for Lundin in Portugal. They have an available workforce, available equipment to get underground and get us up and running again fairly quickly. We think in this case, we need about 9 months of underground development. We want to develop 4 levels deeper and then start mining from the bottom up, use the waste for backfill, and then at the same time, drill from underground to expand our resource. What is our resource? So we got about 300,000 ounces, just under 7 grams. It's not your typical resource you would see with a Canadian company that's been drilling for the last 5 or 10 years. The concept for Galantas was get enough ounces and get back into production, and we think we've got the ounces. Most of the drilling is focused on 2 veins, Joshua and Kearney. I'd say 85% of the drilling has been in 2 veins. When you look at Dalridian, to get to their 6 million ounce resource, they've got 26 veins that they've identified to get the 6 million ounces. It might be 30 veins plus to get to their 10 million, because we hear in rumors that there's 10 million ounces now at Dalridian. So we've got 17 named veins, of which really only 2 have been drilled. The Kearney vein has been drilled down to 300 meter depth, and the Joshua vein has been drilled down to about 200 meter depth, still wide open on strike and to depth. The other veins have a few holes in them, but at the end of the day, we think as we continue to drill this deposit, we should get a multi-million ounce deposit. And when you look at all the other targets we have in and around these known veins, we think we're in a major gold mining or gold district. And you can sort of see that in this image here. You've got, in the northern part, you've got Northern Ireland, you've got Dalridian, you've got Galantas, and if you go further north, you also have a company called Scott Gold. We're all on this Dalridian belt, very little drilling, but the 3 of us more or less control this district. Galantas being one of the largest landowners, we have slightly less ground than Dalridian, but not that much. So this is quite different when you look at other gold districts, say Timmins or Kirkland Lake, where you have multitude of juniors controlling these kind of deposits. It's really just 2 companies, in our case in Northern Ireland, that control what we think is the most prospective ground for high-grade gold, probably in Europe. So where are we? And why we think we have district scale potential. You can see our mining license area there, where we call OM1. We think that is the area to be, which is the Dalridian belt. You've got this major fault that cuts through Galantas into Dalridian that allowed the gold fluids to come up. It goes into Scotland, it goes into Newfoundland, but when you look at this part of the world, very little drilling. Like Galantas has had about 30,000 meters of drilling, to put that in perspective. Newfound Gold is drilling 150,000 meters a year. We've had 30,000 meters of drilling, that's it. So you can imagine as we start putting more and more drills here, get the cash flow, how many ounces we can find. And I'll show you why it's pretty obvious that this is a multi-million ounce deposit. So this used to be owned by Rio Tinto, and they did quite a bit of work here. That square box is where our mining license is, but all those red dots are all high priority targets for gold. Those could be outcrops, it could be streams, soil samples, etc. So we've really just started to touch the surface of what we think is a highly prospective area for gold mineralization. And then in terms of near mine targets, again, most of our drilling is focused on 2 veins, what we call the Kearney and Joshua vein. But if you go slightly to the east, slightly to the west, in the middle of those veins, there's been a number of veins identified that, again, are all high grade. A couple of holes, for example, the Elkin veins, which is about 500 meters to the east of the Kearney vein. In 2014, 1 drill hole was drilled of about 2 meters of 11 grams. Haven't really been followed up on, but geophysics indicates that it has very similar structure to what has been already identified at Joshua and Kearney. You could really see it in this image here. No geophysics has been done in this area since the 70s by Rio Tinto. We did do a couple of IP and resistivity at the Elkins vein, which is what you see there to the right, and the Pigeon Top area, which is to the left of the Joshua vein. You get the exact same north-south structure, similar resistivity, and it's all within this, what we call this common call member unit, which is these quartz-rich rocks. So we're pretty confident that we got a multi-kilometer district here when you're looking at just that. And when you go further afield based on other outcrops, we think we've got at least a 7 to 10 kilometer area of gold mineralization, of which those 2 areas in blue right in the middle there, the Joshua and the Kearney vein, the only 2 that have been drilled very shallow. This is quite interesting. I've got about 5 minutes, but this is really interesting for us as you go a little bit further west. We think when you look at Dalridian, they may have identified the source intrusion for Dalridian. When you're looking at our project at Galantas, remember, we're only 20 kilometers away, but we get slightly different metals in ours. We get lead, where Dalridian gets a little bit more copper. we think we've identified the potential intrusion for Galantas. We don't have the whole area, but we have an application to expand a little bit further south so we encompass that whole area. But that in itself is quite interesting because the actual source of the mineralization has never been found for Galantas, and some may argue even for Dalradian. But if you think of Timmins, for example, the concept of Timmins was, when I was CFO of Lakeshore Gold, the Timmins West Mine and Thunder Creek were fingers. But there's a palm somewhere on the west side of Timmins that needs to be found. Well, this could be the palm. That's sort of our concept here. And then you can sort of see here where we have a 7-kilometer trend. Those are all various targets. The dark green area is the Covenant Call member unit, which is the quartz-rich rocks. You can see the Kearney vein, the Joshua vein. Kearney Deep is a high priority target for us because that was drilled in the 70s by Rio Tinto, but they never drilled deep enough to hit the down dip extension of the Kearney North. But there's about 7 kilometers of strike there of gold mineralization identified to date. And you can sort of see the cross section of the rocks for Kearney, where half of our drilling has more or less occurred. It's wide open to depth. We've now been able to identify what we call dilation zones. And what I mean by that is we know there's pinching and swelling that occurs in these veins, but before we identified the swelling portion, we always thought the veins had about average width of about 1.5 meters, which is a little bit thicker than Dalradian, by the way. But when we went underground, started doing some underground mapping, we identified areas that swell. And this is where you're starting to see where the grades and thickness increase quite significantly. For example, the last hole we drilled at Joshua from surface was 13 meters of 17 grams in a dilation zone. At the Kearney vein, we drilled 7 meters of 31 grams. So our view is you're going to get these stacked dilation zones that all plunge to the north. And I'll show you a quick image of that now. This is the Kearney vein, and those areas, those arrows in yellow are the stacked dilation zones. Again, the mineralization has only been drilled to a depth of 300 meters. This will go down to the bowels of the earth. This is an orogenic deposit, old rocks, just like you see in Canada and the rest of the world. So the deeper we drill, we're just confident we'll continue to find mineralization. And what's quite different here is this is not nuggety. Where we drill, where we see the structure, we hit gold all the time. We don't really see any drill holes where you don't hit any gold. It could be a low grade, could be a 3 grams. But whenever we see the structure, we see the sulfides, we're pretty confident we're in ore. And that makes mining a lot easier because you're not relying on finding the next 200-gram nugget. You're consistently getting 3 to 30 grams in your hits. And this is Kearney. The various colors there are measured indicating inferred resources, but you can see at the Joshua vein, the 13 meters of 17 grams, that's highlighted there. And then a little bit deeper, you can see another hole there of 21 meters of 10 grams. These are dilation zones. All this needs to be followed up on. And then very quickly, I got like 30 seconds I want to mention, we picked up another high-grade VMS project in Scotland. It's called Garlock. Have a look at it. It's 10 kilometers, we think, of potential strike. We drilled a few holes. A couple of highlight holes would have been 30 meters of 4.5 grams gold and just under 1% copper. Another hole would have been 18 meters of 2.7% copper and just under a gram gold. This is quite interesting. Never been tested since the 1970s, but we think we've got a 10-kilometer trend here. So open up to questions very quickly.